I'm the broke student in class who can barely afford meals. I'm also the punchline for all the rich kids. One time during a game of truth or dare, Makoto, one of those rich kids, made a bet right in front of everyone with Willow, the spoiled heiress. He asked her if she could make me kneel on the ground and bark like a dog. Grinning, he said, "I'll teach you." Every time he barks, you give him 100. If that's not enough, make it 200. That's about all he's worth anyway. My blood boiled. I might be poor, but does that mean I have no dignity? Yeah, apparently, I didn't. So that day, swallowing my rage, I accepted 90,000. From that day on, my life completely changed. The rice bowls in the cafeteria I never dared to order before, I started getting them every single day. The instant noodles sold downstairs in the dorm, I bought them by the box. The full set of postgraduate exam prep books next to the library, I could finally afford them. 8 years later, I pulled off a total underdog comeback, making over $1 million a year. At the peak of my success, I saw a curled-up figure under an overpass, a filthy face, torn clothes, but those eyes, I'd recognize them even if I were reduced to ashes. It was her. It was her. It was her. The one person I could never forget in my life, Willow. Chapter 1. The phone rang while I was shoveling rice into my mouth on the 3rd floor of the cafeteria. A bowl of plain rice, a free serving of soup. My screen lit up. The name David appeared. I tapped to answer, my fingers still sticky with grains of rice. "George, where you at?" His voice was loud, music and laughter blasting in the background. "Cafeteria," I replied. He said, "Hurry up." Golden Palace KTV, room 302. It's Willow's birthday. I frowned. Willow, the campus beauty of our class, also a well-known rich girl. What does her birthday have to do with me? "I think I'll pass," I said, swallowing my rice, almost choking a little. "Cut the crap. Willow specifically asked for you. Get over here." The call ended. I stared at the half bowl of rice left in front of me. I'd lost my appetite. Going meant spending money. Splitting the bill tonight would cost at least $200 to $300. That was half a month's living expenses for me. Not going. But Willow had personally asked for me. I didn't have many friends in class, just David, my overly friendly roommate. Falling out with Willow wouldn't do me any good. I put down my bowl and chopsticks and walked out of the cafeteria. The autumn wind was a little cold. I tightened the worn-out jacket on me. Washed so many times it had faded. The KTV wasn't far from campus. I walked for 20 minutes. The receptionist at the entrance glanced at me. There was something in that look. I ignored it and went straight up to the 3rd floor. Room 302 wasn't fully closed. Music blasted from inside. I pushed the door open. A huge private room, more than 20 people inside. The table was piled high with fruit platters, snacks, and expensive liquor. Willow sat right in the center, wearing a beautiful dress like a princess. David spotted me and waved. "George God, over here." I walked over and sat down on a corner sofa. No one paid attention to me. They were all crowding around Willow, laughing, singing. I felt completely out of place. The air itself smelled like money. After a while, someone suggested, "Singing's boring. Let's do something more exciting. Truth or dare." Everyone cheered. A bottle started spinning on the table. I silently prayed it wouldn't land on me. It narrowly missed me several times. Then it pointed straight at Willow. The room erupted. A guy asked, "Willow, truth or dare?" Willow had been drinking a little. Her cheeks were slightly flushed as she smiled. "Dare." The guy, Makoto, loved showing off. His eyes shifted, and he looked straight at me. "Willow, wanna make a bet with the guy behind you, George?" All eyes instantly locked onto me. My body stiffened. Willow turned around and glanced at me. There was that typical rich girl curiosity in her eyes, detached, indifferent, like nothing really mattered. "What's the bet?" she asked. Makoto grinned, raising his voice. "Let's bet whether you can make him kneel down and bark like a dog. If you can't, you transfer him 90,000. The room went silent for a split second. Then came even louder laughter. 90,000? Are you insane? It's just a joke. Why make it so big?" "Exactly. No way Willow would." Makoto shrugged. "Is it that hard? I'll teach you. Every bark gets him 100. If that's not enough, make it 200. That's about what he's worth." He wanted to embarrass Willow. And me. Everyone looked at Willow. My face burned. 90,000, a number they tossed around so casually. Just a few days ago, my mom called, saying the house back home still needed 20,000 to be finished. She couldn't sleep from the stress. I sat there like a joke. Willow said nothing. She just looked at me. Her gaze was calm, no mockery, no pity. It was like she was evaluating the worth of this dare. David nudged me and whispered, "Don't take it seriously. Makoto's just an idiot." But how could I not? When your dignity is being pressed into the dirt with money, you can't just not take it seriously. Suddenly, Willow smiled. "Sure." She picked up her phone from the table and opened her banking app. Everyone around froze. They thought she was joking. She looked up again, meeting my eyes. What's your phone number? Chapter 2. The room fell deathly silent. Only the music kept playing. Everyone looked at Willow, then at me. Makoto's grin froze on his face. David was stunned too, his mouth hanging open, not knowing what to say. I felt the blood rush to my head. My phone number. She was asking for my phone number. My throat went dry. I couldn't get a single word out. Willow waited patiently, holding her phone, and asked again. Your number? Almost mechanically, I recited the digits. She lowered her head, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. People in the room exchanged looks. Some whispered quietly. Is she really transferring it? No way, that's 90,000. I stared at her. Her expression was focused, like she was just completing something completely ordinary. A few seconds later, she put her phone down and looked at Makoto. Done. Makoto's face turned ugly. Willow, don't. Willow cut him off, her tone calm. A bet's a bet. After saying that, she set her phone down and didn't look at me again, as if the matter was already over. The next second, my phone vibrated in my pocket. My hand trembled as I reached in. The screen lit up. A bank message. XX Bank, your account ending in XX has received 90,000. Current balance, 90,088.82. Those zeros stabbed into my eyes. $88.82. That had been everything I had left for the month. Now, with 90,000 added, 90,088.82. I shoved the phone back into my pocket, my palm drenched in sweat. I stood up. Everyone was looking at me. Their expressions were complicated: shock, envy, curiosity. I didn't say a word. I turned and walked toward the door. George, where are you going? David called. I didn't look back. I walked out of the KTV. The cold night air hit my face, and I shivered. My mind was blank. I walked the streets for a long time, not knowing where I was going. I passed a 24-hour convenience store. I went in and stood in front of the shelves for a long time. In the end, I picked up the most expensive cup noodles, a sausage, and a braised egg. At the counter, $15. Before, I only dared to buy the $3 instant noodles. Carrying the bag, I went back to the dorm. No one was there. David and the others hadn't returned yet. I boiled water with the kettle and prepared the noodles. As the steam rose, I finally felt alive again. I sat at the desk, took out my phone, and read that message again. 90,000. I counted those zeros over and over again. This money could let my mom finally sleep without worry. Could let me stop relying on free soup at the cafeteria. Could let me buy the full set of postgraduate prep books I had always wanted. Could let me live like a human being. I finished the noodles, drank even the last drop of soup. Then I took out a notebook and a pen. My hands were still trembling, but my eyes were clear. On the first page, I wrote, 4-year plan. Then I started calculating. 4 years of college, 48 months. Monthly living expenses, I set it at 800. 48 months, that's 38,400. Tuition was 5,000 a year. 3 years left, that's 15,000. Postgraduate prep materials and professional books, estimated 5,000. The house back home, needed 20,000. Adding it all up, 78,400. The remaining 11,600 would be emergency savings. Untouchable. I wrote down every single expense clearly. This 90,000 wasn't some windfall. It was Willow's lost bet, and also my lifeline for the next 4 years. I had to use it well. Use it to get through graduation, get my degree, find a good job, and then pay her back, with interest. By the time I finished writing the last word, it was almost dawn. I looked at the plan on the notebook. For the first time, I felt completely at peace. The next day, on my way to class, I saw Willow at the entrance of the teaching building. She stood with a few girls, chatting and laughing. She was wearing a different dress from yesterday. When she saw me, she paused for a moment. Then, as if nothing had ever happened, she turned away and continued talking with her friends. I lowered my head and quickly walked into the classroom. Between us, there stands 90,000, and all that remains between us is that same 90,000. Chapter 3. My life changed. The first thing that changed was how I ate. I no longer went to the third floor for free soup. I started going to the seafood counter on the second floor, ordering a $25 shrimp rice bowl. The first time I ordered it, even the cafeteria lady froze for a moment and gave me an extra look. I paid without expression, carrying my tray to a corner. The shrimp was fresh, springy. I ate slowly, chewing every bite carefully. A classmate sat across from me and said, well, George, struck gold or something. Seeing my shrimp bowl, he looked surprised. Hit the lottery. No, I kept my head down and ate. Then what's going on? Something's off with you. He leaned closer, trying to press further. Eat your food. I cut him off. Seeing that I didn't want to talk, he clicked his tongue and stopped asking. But every now and then, he looked at me with a strange expression. The milk tea shop downstairs in the dorm, I used to just pass by it. Now, every afternoon, I'd go buy a drink. The cheapest lemonade, $8. The junior working there got to know me. Senior, lemonade again today. Yeah. Holding the cup, I'd walk slowly back to the dorm, sipping it for almost an hour. It was sour, with a hint of sweetness. The latest set of postgraduate exam prep books in the library, 12 volumes in total, priced at $880. I had checked them out many times before, only flipping through them briefly each time. Now, I walked straight into the bookstore and told the owner, "I'll take the whole set." While he packed them up, I paid. Carrying that heavy stack of brand new books out of the store, the sunlight felt warm on my back. I no longer had to fight for seats in the library. I no longer had to copy other people's old notes. I had my own weapons. That weekend, my mom called again. Her voice was still full of worry. "George, about the money, your dad tried borrowing again, but no one would lend it." "Mom," I interrupted, "stop borrowing. If we don't, what can we do? The contractor keeps pushing." "I have it." There was silence on the other end. After a long while, my mom's voice came back, trembling with tears. "You have it. Where did you get that kind of money? Did you do something stupid out there?" "No," my voice was calm. "The school gave me a scholarship, plus what I saved before. It's $20,000. A scholarship? That much?" "National level," I lied, without hesitation. "Then, what about your living expenses?" "I'm fine," I said. "Send me the account number. I'll go to the bank this afternoon." I hung up and went straight to the bank. I transferred $20,000. When I walked out of the bank, the sky seemed a little bluer. The first item in my notebook was crossed off. I stopped doing tutoring. I stopped helping in the cafeteria kitchen. Every bit of my time went into studying, living in the library, self-study sessions, grinding through textbooks as thick as bricks. Willow and I were still classmates. In large lectures, she sat in the front row, while I sat in the back. In smaller classes, we were occasionally assigned to the same group. She never spoke to me. I never approached her either. Once, during a group discussion, we had to pair up for a presentation. The teacher assigned pairs randomly. I ended up with her. Everyone looked at us, their expressions subtle. After that incident, the whole class knew. Willow had thrown away $90,000, sponsoring the poorest guy in class. Rumors spread in every direction. Some said we were dating. Some said I was her keptman, a simp living off her money. Willow acted like she hadn't heard anything. She just looked at me and spoke in a formal tone. "Which part are you taking?" "The last 3 chapters, I replied. "All right." After that, she turned to discuss with others. There was no further interaction between us. I gathered the materials. I made the slides. The day before the presentation, I sent her the finished file. She replied with a single word, "Received." The next day, we went up to present. I covered my part. She covered hers. We weren't exactly in sync, but we didn't mess up either. The teacher gave us a decent grade. After we stepped down, she walked ahead, and I followed behind. Near the door, she suddenly stopped and turned to look at me. "Good job." That was the first thing she said to me after that night. Not a question, not a request, just a plain evaluation. "As expected," I replied. She nodded and turned away. Her back looked just like it did that night in the KTV. Proud, distant, as if that $90,000 had truly been nothing more than a game to her. She didn't care, but I did. Back in the dorm, I opened my 4-year plan notebook. On the first page, next to Willow's name, I wrote, "Collaborated once before." Then I crossed it out heavily, like a ritual, a reminder that between her and me, there was nothing except money. Chapter 04. In my second year of university, I received the national scholarship, 8,000 yuan. I didn't touch the money. I deposited it, untouched, into another bank card. This was income outside my plan, and also the first piece of startup capital for my debt repayment plan. I continued to strictly follow my 4-year plan. 800 yuan a month for living expenses, not a cent more, not a cent less. I kept a small notebook to track every expense, down to the last jiao. Bought a pen, 5 yuan, recorded. Had a meal, 12 yuan, recorded. Paid class fees, 20 yuan, recorded. David said I lived like a robot. George, God, seriously, is this necessary? You're not even short on money now, he said, staring at my ledger in confusion. What's the point of all this? I couldn't explain it to him. He didn't understand. Those 90,000 yuan weren't just money to me. They were a rope tied around my neck. The other end of that rope was in Willow's hands. Only by relying on myself, inch by inch, pulling until I snapped that rope could I breathe freely again. In the second semester of sophomore year, the school held its annual sports meet. Every class had a mandatory registration quota. When the counselor couldn't find anyone for the 3,000-meter race, David signed me up. George, God, you're either running every day or buried in the library. Your stamina's definitely solid. Bring glory to the class. I didn't object. Running didn't cost money, and it kept me fit. On the day of the race, the weather was scorching. I stood at the starting line in the most basic athletic shorts and tank top. The starting gun fired, and I ran at my own pace. I wasn't chasing a ranking, I just wanted to finish. By the final lap, I was completely drained. Sweat blurred my vision, and my lungs felt like they were on fire. As I passed the main stand, I instinctively glanced up. Willow was sitting there. She was with the student council members, wearing a uniform outfit and a sun hat. She seemed to be chatting with someone beside her, a faint smile on her face. Under the sunlight, her skin looked almost luminous. She wasn't watching the track. She wasn't watching me. In her world, this sports meet, something she probably found mildly boring, was less important than a casual conversation with her friends. I pulled my gaze back, clenched my teeth, and kept running. When I crossed the finish line, I collapsed to the ground, completely exhausted. David ran over, helped me up, and handed me a bottle of water. 4th place. George God, that's insane. You almost got a prize. I was gasping for air, unable to say a single word. I just felt that the distance between Willow and me was like that 3,000-meter track. I was down here, running with everything I had, drenched in sweat, disheveled and desperate. And she would always be seated high above, calm and untouched. That night, back in the dorm, I wrote a line in my 4-year plan notebook. Repayment plan, starting capital, 8,000 yuan. Goal, 90,000 yuan. This was no longer some vague, distant fantasy. I had my first foundation stone. Time passed quickly. My life became like a pre-programmed routine: classes, meals, library, sleep. I rarely joined group activities and barely spoke to anyone. Most of my classmates had grown used to my solitary lifestyle. All they knew was that George was a freakishly high-achieving weirdo. Only I knew the truth. I didn't dare stop. I was afraid that the moment I stopped, that massive debt would crush me. In my junior year, I started working on a project with a professor, earning a monthly stipend of 500 yuan. I also took on freelance programming gigs online in my spare time. It was exhausting. I often stayed up past midnight. But every month, my repayment account would grow by 1 or 2,000 yuan. Watching that number slowly increase was the only thing that gave me a sense of security. Willow's life, on the other hand, seemed unchanged. She was still the center of attention, still wearing beautiful clothes, still arriving in cars whose brands I couldn't even name. We still didn't speak. Occasionally, when we passed each other, her gaze would sweep over me, never lingering for more than a second. That look was like seeing a familiar stranger. I accepted it calmly. We were never from the same world to begin with. Those 90,000 yuan, it was an accident, and it was a transaction. She used money to win a reckless game. I traded my dignity, and 4 years of my future, for a chance to change my fate. And now, the transaction was still ongoing. I was working hard to become a worthy counterpart in that deal. Chapter 05. In the blink of an eye, it was already my senior year. There were fewer classes, and everyone had begun to busy themselves with their future. Some were preparing for graduate school exams, some for civil service exams, others for job hunting. The dormitory hallways were filled every day with the sounds of phone calls for interviews, and occasionally, the muffled sound of someone crying. I was busy too. On one hand, I had to complete my graduation project. On the other, I was preparing for written tests and interviews at several major companies. My 4-year plan was nearing its end. Every expense in my notebook was recorded with absolute clarity. That 90,000 yuan had been squeezed for every bit of value it could offer. I had used it to arm my mind, and to maintain my most basic dignity. It seemed Willow was preparing to go abroad. I heard it from David. Her family already arranged everything for her, an Ivy League school, then straight to Wall Street after graduation. She's basically set for life, David said, his tone full of envy. I nodded, feeling nothing. That was the life trajectory she was always meant to have. One ordinary afternoon, I walked out of the library, heading back to the dorm. As I passed by the campus lake, I saw a familiar figure. It was Willow. She was sitting alone on a bench by the lake, no entourage, no friends. She wore a simple white dress, staring blankly at the water. The glow of the setting sun bathed her in a soft golden light. She wasn't like her usual self. The distant, untouchable aura was gone. She looked lonely, even fragile. I stopped walking and stood under the shade of a nearby tree. I didn't know why she was there alone. Maybe she was having trouble with her applications. Maybe she had argued with a friend. Many thoughts crossed my mind, but none of them felt certain. She just sat there quietly, the breeze by the lake lifting her long hair. After a while, she took something out of her bag. It looked like a small music box. She wound it up, and a clear, gentle melody began to play. It was Castle in the Sky. She held the music box in her hands, lowered her head, and remained completely still. I couldn't see her expression, but I could feel a sense of sadness radiating from her. This was a Willow I had never seen before. In my mind, she had always been dazzling, radiant, full of life. She could casually throw out 90,000 yuan, and just as casually complete a transaction with me. She was like a perfect sculpture, cold and distant. But now, that sculpture seemed to have developed a crack. I suddenly remembered that moment in freshman year, after she transferred the money to me, when she looked up and said, "A bet's a bet." Her expression had been calm, indifferent, but deep in her eyes, there seemed to be something I hadn't understood back then. What was it? I didn't know. I stood under the tree for a long time, until the sky turned completely dark, and the streetlights by the lake lit up. Willow put away the music box, stood up, and slowly walked away. From beginning to end, she never noticed me. When I returned to the dorm, for once, I didn't open my expense notebook, nor did I check my repayment plan. I sat at my desk, lost in thought for a long time. My mind was filled with the image of Willow sitting by the lake, and the melody of Castle in the Sky. For the first time, I realized that Willow might not be exactly as she appeared. In that magnificent world of hers, she might also have her own troubles and loneliness. Those 90,000 yuan might mean nothing to her, but that reckless game, and her words, "A bet's a bet," what did they mean to her? For the first time, I began to think about this question, but I couldn't find an answer. Between her and me lay a world I could never cross. The only thing I could do was finish our transaction as soon as possible, and then completely exit her world. I turned on my computer and began revising my resume. Interview invitations would be coming soon. I had to secure the best offer possible. Chapter 06. Graduation drew closer with each passing day. I received an offer from one of the top internet companies in the country. Its salary and benefits exceeded all my expectations. On the day I signed the contract, I walked out of the company building, stood under the sunlight, and let out a long breath. For years of endurance and effort had finally paid off. The first thing I did was call home and tell my mom the news. She cried on the other end of the phone, repeating the same sentence over and over. "My son has made it, my son has made it." My eyes grew a little moist as well. That night, back in the dorm, I opened my 4-year plan notebook. On the last page was my financial summary. Income, 90,000 yuan. Expenses, tuition, 15,000 yuan. Living expenses, 36,800 yuan. Books and materials, 4,800 yuan. Family support, 20,000 yuan. Miscellaneous, 1,300 yuan. Total expenses, 77,900 yuan. These were just the core accounts. There were many smaller expenses recorded in another notebook. 4 years, 90,000 yuan. I had spent almost every last cent. I checked my bank balance, 90,088. 82 yuan had once been there. Now, only 82 yuan remained. Perfect. Everything had concluded exactly according to my plan. I closed the notebook. This book, which had carried my 4 years of youth, humiliation, and struggle, had fulfilled its purpose. In my repayment account, I had already saved over 30,000 yuan, still far from the goal of 90,000. But now, I had a stable, high-paying job and a clear ability to repay. The rest was only a matter of time. On graduation day, the weather was bright and clear. Everyone wore their graduation gowns, taking photos all over campus. Laughter, hugs, and farewells filled the air. I stood quietly outside the crowd. Like an outsider, I didn't have many friends. The only one I was somewhat close to, David, had accepted a job back in his hometown and would be leaving by train that afternoon. I couldn't find Willow. The entire morning, I didn't see her anywhere in the crowd. Maybe she didn't come at all. For someone like her, a graduation ceremony might not mean much. I couldn't tell whether I felt disappointed or relieved. I had prepared for a long time. I wanted to personally say thank you to her today. I also wanted to tell her I would pay her back. But I couldn't even find her. Just as I was about to leave, a voice came from behind me. "George." I turned around sharply. It was Willow. She was wearing her graduation gown too, her long hair draped over her shoulders, light makeup on her face. She was beautiful. She stood there alone, quietly looking at me. "Congratulations," she said. "You too," I replied, my voice a little dry. "Got an offer?" she asked. "Yeah, I did." "Good." She nodded, her expression calm. Silence fell between us. People moved around us, laughing and celebrating, but the two of us stood there like a silent scene in a film, detached from everything else. I wanted to bring up the money. I wanted to show her my 30,000 yuan account, to tell her about my repayment plan, but the words reached my lips, and I swallowed them back down. In front of her, who was about to go abroad, would my salary and my plan just seem ridiculous? I didn't want to expose my struggle and inadequacy in front of her again. I started, but she spoke first. She said, "I'm leaving." I asked. "To the U.S. Safe travels," I said. She looked at me, her gaze deep. Then she said, George. She suddenly called my name. You don't need to pay that money back. I froze. She continued. I lost that bet. It has nothing to do with you. She paused, then added. You've already earned what you wanted on your own, haven't you? After saying that, she turned and walked away without waiting for my response. I watched her back disappear into the crowd, farther and farther away. A black car was parked at the school gate. She got in, and soon it was gone. I stood there for a long, long time without moving. In my hands, I held my diploma and degree certificate. They felt heavy. She said I didn't need to repay it. She said I had already won, but inside, I felt even emptier. Our transaction had been unilaterally terminated by her. I didn't even have the chance to repay the debt. The rope between us, the one I had struggled so hard to break, had been cut with a casual flick of her hand. It felt like I had thrown a punch with all my strength, only to hit cotton. Powerless, lost. 4 years were over, and the story between Willow and me was over too. At least, that's what I thought. Chapter 07. On my first day at work, HR gave me a tour of the company. Massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a forest of towering skyscrapers. Everyone moved briskly, their faces carrying the peculiar mix of elite exhaustion and excitement. The air smelled of caffeine and money. It reminded me of the KTV from 4 years ago, but it was also completely different. There, money was for indulgence, for games. Here, money was a goal, a kind of fuel. I adapted quickly to this life, or rather, I seamlessly continued the lifestyle I had maintained throughout my 4 years in university. Disciplined, efficient, goal-oriented. Others started work at 9, I arrived at 8. Others left at 6, I worked late into the night. My colleagues called me a workaholic grinder, at first as a joke, later with a hint of respect. I didn't care. They were chasing promotions, raises, year-end bonuses, stock options. I was chasing a number, 90,000. I opened a new bank account the moment my salary came in. After deducting basic living expenses, every remaining cent went into it. I no longer imposed the strict 800 yuan monthly limit I had in college, but I still maintained my frugal habits. No luxury goods, no pointless socializing. My only hobby was going to the gym downstairs in the company building. My life was as simple as a straight line. After 1 year, I became a core member of the team. After 2 years, I independently led a major project and received a 6-figure year-end bonus. After 3 years, I was promoted to project manager, leading a small team of my own. In my repayment account, that number had long surpassed 90,000. I even calculated the interest over 8 years at the highest bank rate, rounding it up to a clean total, 120,000. The money was ready, but the person I owed had vanished. After graduation, Willow seemed to disappear from the world. I tried to find her. I searched through every social media platform, but couldn't find a single active account named Willow that matched her. I asked David, he didn't know either. She went to the US. People like her are in a completely different world from us now. How could there still be any connection? David said over the phone. David had returned to his hometown, working a stable government job, living a steady life and preparing to get married. We stayed in occasional contact, talking only about everyday matters. The name Willow became something unspoken. No one mentioned it anymore. I left the 120,000 yuan sitting in that account, untouched. It was like a cold gravestone, marking that twisted, humbling chapter of my youth. It was also like an unfinished task, one that constantly reminded me that I still owed someone. In the 4th year, I paid a down payment on an apartment in the city. Not large, but with a great view. I also bought a car, not a luxury one, but enough to give me a mobile shell in this vast city. Standing in front of my own floor-to-ceiling window, I looked out at the sea of lights. I had my career, my own home, my own car. By society's standards, I had succeeded. I had finally become the kind of person I once desperately wanted to be. And yet, inside me, that hollow left by Willow remained unfilled. Sometimes, I found myself wondering, how was she doing in the US? A proud princess like her, would she make new friends in a foreign land? Would she still play truth or dare? Would she still, so casually, change the fate of a poor boy's life? I didn't know. All I knew was this: if I never found her, this debt would follow me for the rest of my life. Chapter 08. One Friday evening, the long silent class group chat from university suddenly became active. The class monitor posted an announcement: a 4-year graduation reunion would be held next weekend. The venue was set at a 5-star hotel buffet restaurant. The group immediately came alive. Wow, it's already been 4 years. All hail the class monitor, definitely coming. Anyone in town? Let's meet up. I looked at the flashing profile pictures and messages, feeling no interest. My current life had little overlap with my university classmates anymore. If I went, it would just be people comparing themselves, bragging about their lives. I didn't want to waste time on that. I was about to close WeChat when a private message from David popped up. George God, you going to the reunion? I replied. No, come on, man. It's been 4 years, see the old classmates. I heard Makoto's coming too. That guy's doing pretty well now. Started his own company. Makoto, that name was like a thorn, instantly pricking my nerves. Back in that KTV, it was him, using that flippant, malicious tone, who proposed the 90,000 yuan bet. I said, you go. I have to work overtime this weekend. I made an excuse. Cut it out. You're already a manager now. Do you really need to grind every day? Come on. I haven't seen you in ages. I even flew in from my hometown for this. I couldn't refuse anymore. On the day of the reunion, I drove to the hotel. The parking lot was filled with luxury cars, BMWs, Mercedes-Benz, Porsches. I parked my car in a corner, feeling like that same poor student who had once walked into the KTV. Only this time, I was wearing a decent suit, with enough money in my pocket to pay for this expensive dinner. The private room was already full. Many people had changed, gained weight, or gone bald. When they saw me walk in, several stood up warmly to greet me. George, damn, you're a big shot now. President Wang, nice to meet you. Those classmates who had once ignored me now wore enthusiastic smiles. I responded politely and found a seat in the corner. Makoto was there, just as expected, dressed in designer brands, wearing gold-rimmed glasses, looking every bit the part. When he saw me, he took the initiative, walking over with a glass of wine. George, long time no see. Heard you're doing great at that big tech company. Not bad, I replied calmly. Come on, don't be modest, he said, clinking his glass against mine. In our class, it's basically you and Willow now. Oh wait, just you. He deliberately brought up her name, then cut himself off. I looked at him, saying nothing. After a few rounds of drinks, everyone loosened up. People started reminiscing about old times. And somehow, Willow's name came up again. Speaking of which, what's our class beauty Willow up to now? Must be some Wall Street elite in the US, right? As soon as that was said, the room suddenly fell quiet. Everyone looked at each other, their expressions a bit strange. Makoto took a sip of wine and let out a scoffing laugh. Wall Street elite, you guys must be dreaming. A girl asked curiously, Makoto, do you know something? Makoto clearly enjoyed being the center of attention. He cleared his throat and said, her family went bankrupt. Didn't you know? Bankrupt? Seriously? Everyone was stunned. Makoto shrugged. Of course it's true, he said, a hint of schadenfreude in his tone. About 2 years ago, I think, her dad's investments failed, got screwed over, the cash flow collapsed, and they ended up drowning in debt. I heard it was several hundred million. Several hundred million. Someone gasped. What about Willow? Makoto continued. Her parents were pretty quick-witted. They fled abroad overnight and are still being wanted now. Poor our Princess Willow, left behind alone to shoulder all the debt. Makoto shrugged. Yet there wasn't a trace of sympathy on his face. He said, I also heard recently that the court auctioned off all the assets under her name. She's basically a defaulter now, can't even take high-speed rail or flights. TSK, how the tides have turned. The private room fell into dead silence. Everyone was too shocked by the news to say a word. I felt my blood turn cold in an instant. A buzzing filled my ears. I couldn't hear a single word of what Makoto said afterward. I only knew one thing. Willow had gone bankrupt. That girl who once shone like the sun. That girl who saved me with 90,000. She had fallen. I shot to my feet. The chair scraped harshly against the floor with a piercing sound. Everyone looked at me. I said nothing. I turned and walked away. I walked out of the hotel. The cold wind hit my face, yet I couldn't feel any chill at all. I got into the car, gripping the steering wheel with both hands, not knowing where to go. There was only one thought in my mind. Find her. I have to find her. Chapter 09. I started searching for her like I had lost my mind. For the first time in 4 years, I used every resource I had. I hired a private investigator to track her whereabouts. I asked colleagues from the company's legal department to search public legal records for any debt cases related to her. Bit by bit, the information came together. Everything Makoto said was true. In fact, it was even worse than he described. Her father's company had gone bankrupt and entered liquidation. As one of the guarantors, she was held jointly liable for the debts. All assets under her name, property, cars, bank savings, were frozen and auctioned off to repay creditors. But it was only a drop in the bucket. She had been listed as a dishonest debtor, blacklisted, restricted from high-end consumption. No flights, no high-speed trains, no staying in star-rated hotels. An invisible net had trapped her at the very bottom of the city. The last update from the investigator was that she had rented a basement room in an old residential area 6 months ago. Later, she was evicted for failing to pay rent. After that, she completely disappeared. The trail ended there. I parked my car at the entrance of that old neighborhood, staring at the dark, damp basement entrance for a long time. I couldn't imagine how Willow had fallen from the clouds into such a pit, and I couldn't imagine how she had endured all of it alone. In the months that followed, I wandered through every corner of the city like a ghost. After work, I no longer went home. I drove to places where the homeless might gather. Under bridges, parks, subway entrances, 24-hour fast food restaurants. Every time I saw a thin female figure, my heart would tighten. But every time, it wasn't her. I began to wonder if I would never find her again. Maybe she had already left the city. Maybe she was no longer alive. That thought sent a chill down my spine. It was a winter night, bitterly cold. I had just finished a full week of closed-door development work at the company. I was exhausted, physically and mentally. It was already 1 a.m. I drove through empty streets. As I passed under an overpass, a rear-end accident ahead blocked the road. I had to take a detour, driving under the bridge. Under overpasses, there were always many homeless people spending the night. They built crude shelters with cardboard and tattered blankets. I drove slowly, my headlights sweeping over the curled-up figures. By now, my heart had grown numb. Just as the headlights were about to pass the last shelter, my movement suddenly froze. There was someone lying there, wrapped in a filthy, torn military coat, curled into a ball, no different from the others. But outside the dirty bedding, one foot was exposed. On that foot was a canvas shoe. Its original color was no longer visible, but I recognized the style. It was the kind I had seen countless times in cheap shoe stores near the university. Willow had never worn shoes like that. And yet, my heart suddenly began to pound uncontrollably. I pulled over and turned off the engine. I stepped out of the car. The cold wind cut across my face like knives. Step by step, I walked toward that figure. Everything around me was silent, only the sound of the wind and my own heartbeat. I reached the shelter and slowly crouched down. Under the dim yellow streetlight in the distance, I finally saw her face. It was dirty. Her hair was tangled like dry grass. Her cheeks were hollow, her lips cracked and peeling. But those familiar features, those brows that still carried a trace of stubbornness even in rest, it was her. It really was her. Willow. My breathing stopped. It felt as if a heavy hammer had slammed into my chest. The pain left me speechless. She seemed to sense someone nearby. Her body shifted slightly. Her eyelids trembled, and she struggled to open them just a sliver. Those eyes, once clear and bright, holding a hint of curiosity and distance when they looked at me, now held nothing but exhaustion and emptiness. She looked at me, unfocused, as if she hadn't yet processed what she was seeing. I looked back at her, at the confusion in her eyes. Then I reached out my hand, palm open, just like she had done to me at the graduation ceremony 4 years ago, with that same calm, unquestionable certainty. I heard my own voice, cutting through the cold night air. Reaching her clearly, I said, "Will you come with me?" Her pupils shrank suddenly. The emptiness in her eyes was instantly replaced with shock and disbelief. She stared at me, then at my outstretched hand. In the next second, large tears welled up in her dim eyes, silently, fiercely, sliding down her dirty cheeks. Chapter 10. Her tears were like a glacier that had built up for far too long, finally melting at this moment, collapsing in silence. There was no sobbing, no wailing, just a quiet stream, washing away the dirt on her face, leaving clear streaks behind. I didn't urge her. I didn't speak. We stayed like that, one crouching, one lying, facing each other beneath the overpass. In the biting cold wind, the world seemed muted. The only sounds were the distant friction of passing tires and her nearly soundless tears, swallowed by the wind. After a long time, I stood up, took off my expensive cashmere coat, bent down, and gently draped it over her frail body. The coat still carried my warmth and the scent of my refined woody cologne. That warmth and scent stood in stark contrast to the sour, damp odor clinging to her. Her body trembled violently, as if burned. Her tears flowed even harder. She tried to push the coat away, but she was too weak. Her arm lifted halfway, then dropped limply. I didn't give her the chance to refuse. I crouched down again and, with firm insistence, grabbed her cold arm, pulling her out of that filthy pile of bedding. She was light, so light she felt like a feather. I practically held her up, supporting her unsteady body. She staggered, every step painfully difficult. From under the bridge to where my car was parked, it was only a few dozen meters, but it took us a long time. I opened the car door and settled her into the passenger seat. Curled up in the wide seat, she looked even smaller. My coat wrapped around her like a child wearing an adult's clothes. I closed the door, got into the driver's seat, and turned the heater to maximum. As the warm air began to flow, she started trembling uncontrollably again, her teeth chattering. It was her body reacting, after extreme cold, suddenly exposed to warmth. I didn't ask her where she wanted to go. I didn't ask what had happened over the years. I simply started the car and drove steadily into the traffic. She said nothing, turning her head to stare at the neon lights rushing past outside the window. Those dazzling city lights reflected in her hollow eyes, but stirred no emotion. She was like a puppet stripped of its soul, completely indifferent to the world that once belonged to her. The car entered the underground garage of my apartment complex. I turned off the engine, got out, and walked around to open her door. "We're here," I said. She didn't move, still in the same position, staring outside. I waited patiently. After a long while, she slowly turned her head to look at me, her eyes filled with confusion and uncertainty. I reached out my hand, just like before under the bridge. This time, she hesitated. Then, she placed her cold hand, dirty, covered in small wounds, gently into my palm. I tightened my grip and helped her out of the car. Inside the elevator, the polished mirrored walls clearly reflected our figures. One in a sharp suit, standing tall, the perfect image of the city's elite. The other in tattered clothes, gaunt and worn, like a refugee who had wandered in from another world. Absurd, yet real. I unlocked the door with my fingerprint. Warm, bright light poured out. My apartment wasn't large, but it was spotless. Minimalist Nordic style, everything in perfect order. Willow stood at the entrance, not daring to step inside. She looked down at her canvas shoes, so worn their original color was unrecognizable. Then at the clean wooden floor, her feet instinctively pulled back. "Come in," I said. I took a brand new pair of slippers from the shoe cabinet and placed them in front of her. She hesitated, then changed into them, following me stiffly into the living room. I pointed toward the bathroom. "Go take a shower. There's hot water. Clean towels and clothes are in the cabinet." I didn't have women's clothes, so I found a brand new set of cotton loungewear I had never worn. She moved like a robot, obediently walking into the bathroom. Soon, the sound of running water filled the space. I went into the kitchen and opened the fridge. It was stocked with imported ingredients, milk, steak, fresh fruits and vegetables, but I didn't know what to make for her. Her stomach probably couldn't handle anything heavy right now. In the end, I scooped a small bowl of rice, washed it clean, placed it in a clay pot, and set it on low heat, slowly cooking a simple pot of plain porridge. Chapter 11. The sound of running water in the bathroom went on for a long time. So long that I started to wonder if something had happened to her inside. Just as I was about to knock on the door, the water finally stopped. Another 10 minutes passed before the bathroom door slowly opened. She walked out. Her hair hung wet over her shoulders. She was wearing the oversized loungewear I had given her, the pant legs far too long, loosely bunching around her ankles. She looked like she had been washed clean, revealing her true appearance. Pale, but not the healthy kind. A lifeless, sickly white. Thin, so thin her cheekbones jutted sharply. Her eye sockets hollow. Her chin unnaturally pointed. That face, once proud and radiant, now held nothing but exhaustion and fragility. She didn't dare look at me. Her head was lowered, her hands nervously gripping the hem of her clothes. I ladled the porridge into a bowl, placed it on the table, and pushed it toward her. "Eat something." My voice was calm. She lifted her head, looked at the steaming, plain white porridge, then at me. Those eyes, still damp from the hot water, quickly filled with tears again. 1 drop, 2 drops. They fell precisely into the bowl, rippling the surface. In the end, she picked it up. Her hands trembled badly. The ceramic spoon clinked softly against the bowl. Head lowered, she took small bites, slowly bringing the porridge, mixed with her tears, into her mouth. At first, she swallowed mechanically. Then, as if a long-suppressed hunger had been awakened, her pace gradually quickened. The bowl was soon empty. I said nothing. I took her bowl and filled it halfway again. She didn't refuse. She accepted it silently and continued eating. After finishing the second bowl, she put the spoon down. With food in her stomach, her complexion improved slightly, no longer that terrifying, deathly pale. I cleared the dishes, then pointed toward the guest room beside the master bedroom. "You can sleep there. Get some rest." The guest room door was open. Inside was a bed with clean sheets, a wardrobe, and a window overlooking the city at night. She stood at the doorway, staring at the soft, comfortable bed. Her eyes were filled with longing, but she didn't dare step forward, as if that bed wasn't a bed, but a dream she didn't deserve. "Go in," I repeated, my tone firm. She seemed to snap out of it, lowered her head, and quickly walked in, gently closing the door behind her. I returned to my own room, but I couldn't fall asleep. From the next room, I could hear faint sounds, soft, suppressed sobbing pushed to its limits. My heart felt like it was being gripped tightly by an invisible hand, tightening again and again. I had found her. I had brought her home. This should have been the moment I had imagined countless times, the moment of redemption, of settling the debt, but I felt no relief, no joy, only a heavy, indescribable pain. The girl who once used 90,000 yuan to pull me out of the mud like a savior, now needed a single bowl of plain porridge from me just to survive. The absurdity and cruelty of fate had never been clearer. Chapter 12. Over the next few days, a strange kind of unspoken understanding formed between us. I went to work as usual every day. She stayed at home. She slept a lot. On the first day, She slept almost 20 hours straight, as if trying to make up, all at once, for the years of restless, broken sleep she had lost. She still didn't speak. There was no communication between us. Before leaving for work, I would prepare a simple breakfast and leave it on the table. After work, I would bring dinner back. I bought her a new phone and set up a new SIM card. I bought her many new clothes, not those expensive dresses, but simple, comfortable hoodies, t-shirts, and jeans. I placed them neatly in the wardrobe in her room. She would quietly eat the food I prepared. She would change into the clothes I bought, but still, she was like a transparent shadow living in the apartment, so quiet she almost had no presence at all. I could tell that she was using this silence to preserve the last shred of her dignity. She didn't want to talk to me, because the moment she spoke, it would mean acknowledgement, acknowledging her failure, acknowledging her broken state, acknowledging that she needed my help, my charity. I knew I had to give her time. The change came on the fourth day. When I got home from work, I noticed that the dishes I had left in the sink that morning had been washed and neatly placed on the rack. The floor had also been cleaned, more thoroughly than I ever did myself. I walked into the living room and saw her sitting on the sofa. She was no longer hiding in her room. She sat quietly, looking out at the city's dusk through the floor-to-ceiling window, her silhouette so thin it seemed like a sheet of paper. When she heard me come in, her shoulders trembled almost imperceptibly. She stood up, turned to face me, her lips moving slightly as if she wanted to say something, but in the end, she said nothing. She lowered her head and started walking back toward her room. "Wait," I called out. She stopped, her back facing me. "You don't have to do this," I said. Her body stiffened. After a long pause, she slowly turned around, and for the first time, met my eyes. Her gaze was filled with complex emotions, gratitude, humiliation, struggle, and a trace of something resolute that I couldn't quite understand. Then, finally, she spoke. This was the first thing she had said to me since coming here. Her voice was hoarse and dry, like two pieces of sandpaper scraping against each other. I can't stay here for free." Her voice was soft, but it struck like a nail driven straight into my heart. Even now, she still cared about that. She was still the same proud Willow. I looked at her, my emotions tangled and conflicted. I walked into the study, opened the deepest drawer in my bookshelf, and took out a notebook, a plain notebook, its cover already worn. I returned to the living room, walked up to her, opened it, and handed it to her. She lowered her head in confusion, but the moment her eyes landed on the words on the first page, her pupils shrank sharply. Written there were 3 words, 4-year plan. Below it was my neat, careful handwriting, detailing every single plan for that 90,000 yuan. Tuition, living expenses, books and materials, money sent home. Every single entry, recorded with precision. I pointed at the section labeled, living expenses, and said to her, "Back then, you used 90,000 yuan to cover my rent and living expenses for 4 years. My voice was calm, but carried an undeniable firmness. Now, I said, it's my turn. She stared blankly at the notebook, at the densely packed numbers and words. To her, it had been nothing more than a forgotten bet, a game. But to someone else, it had been a survival contract, executed with near religious devotion over 4 years of youth. Her fingers began to tremble uncontrollably. She reached out, wanting to touch those familiar words on the page, but didn't dare. In those eyes that had been lifeless and empty these past few days, something finally shattered completely. Chapter 13. That 4-year plan notebook became like a key, finally prying open the emotional floodgate she had kept sealed for so long. She could no longer maintain that fragile, brittle composure. She covered her face, slowly crouching down, her shoulders shaking violently. The sobs she had suppressed for far too long finally broke free through her fingers. This was no silent crying, no quiet sniffles, it was a raw, heart-wrenching breakdown, as if she was trying to cry out every ounce of grievance, pain, despair, and fear she had endured over the years. I didn't go to help her. I didn't say a single word of comfort. I knew what she needed right now wasn't cheap sympathy, but a space to completely collapse and release everything. I simply stood quietly to the side, placing a box of tissues within her reach, like a silent guardian, letting her cries echo through the still apartment. She cried for a long, long time, so long that her voice grew hoarse, and her body trembled from exhaustion. Only then did it gradually stop. She remained crouched on the floor, like a lost child, her shoulders still twitching. I poured a glass of warm water and handed it to her. She took it, sipped a little, and slowly calmed down. "Get up, the floor's cold," I said. She supported herself against the sofa, unsteady as she stood, then sat down. I placed the notebook on the coffee table in front of her. Silence filled the living room once again. After a long while, she finally spoke, her voice still rough. "I'm sorry." I looked at her, slightly surprised. She said, "About what happened back then?" "I'm sorry." Her head was lowered, her voice full of guilt. I didn't know that money meant so much to you. You don't need to apologize, I interrupted. If anything, I should thank you. Without that money, there wouldn't be the person I am today. I meant it. That 90,000 yuan wasn't just money. It was a light in the darkest moment of my life, the only lifeline I had when I was drowning in the mud. It shaped me. It made me who I am. She lifted her head, her eyes red, looking at me. Her lips moved. And finally, she asked the question, why? Her voice was soft, like she was asking me, or perhaps asking herself, why are you being so good to me? I looked at her, at those eyes filled with confusion and disbelief. I didn't answer directly. Instead, I took out my phone, unlocked it, opened my banking app, and pulled up a specific account. Then I handed it to her. She took it, puzzled. The moment she saw the number on the screen, her entire body froze. The balance read, 120,000 yuan. What is this? She asked, looking at me in disbelief. I said, this is your money, the 90,000 principal, plus the interest over the past 8 years, calculated at the highest rate. I've had it ready for a long time. I just couldn't find you. Willow stared fixedly at the number on the screen. Compared to the massive debts her family once owed, this 120,000 yuan was nothing. But she understood, the meaning of this money had long surpassed its value. It was my obsession over these past 8 years. It was the lighthouse that never went out while I walked alone through the dark. It was the dignity I had fought to reclaim with everything I had. And more than that, it was proof that between us, this had never been about charity or pity. It was a transaction, an equal one. She finally understood why I had searched for her, why I had brought her home, why I was taking care of her now. This wasn't sympathy, not pity, not some condescending act of charity. This was repayment, a delayed, but solemn settlement, 4 years overdue. She handed the phone back to me, then covered her face with both hands. This time, she didn't cry. Her body was just trembling nonstop. I looked at her, and a place inside me that had been empty for a long time seemed, at this very moment, to be filled with something. I walked over and sat beside her. This time, I didn't keep my distance. I reached out my hand and gently placed it on her trembling shoulder. Willow, I called her name, my voice softer than ever before. It's all over. She lowered her hands and lifted her tear-streaked face, looking at me. Under the dim yellow light, her eyes were no longer hollow or numb. There seemed to be starlight flickering inside them, little by little, rekindling her hope for life. She looked at me for a very, very long time. Then, the corners of her lips slowly curved upward into a small arc. It was an extremely fragile, yet extremely precious smile, like the first hint of new green struggling out of frozen ground after a long winter. I knew that the 8-year-long transaction between her and me, about money and dignity, had only truly come to an end at this moment, and a new story had just begun. Chapter 14. The next morning, when I woke up, daylight had already filled the room. It was the first time since moving into this apartment that I had slept until I woke up naturally. When I stepped out of the bedroom, I was surprised to find that Willow was already awake. She wasn't curled up on the sofa like the past few days. Instead, she stood in front of the large floor-to-ceiling window. Morning light streamed through the glass, outlining her figure with a soft golden glow. She wore my oversized loungewear, holding a cup of hot water, quietly watching the city come to life. Hearing my footsteps, she turned around. A night of proper sleep seemed to have restored some of her energy. Her eyes were no longer hollow. They were like a pool of still, deep water, though the bottom was still unseen. At least the surface was no longer lifeless. Morning, she said softly. It was the first time she had greeted me on her own. Morning, I nodded, walking into the kitchen to take out milk and eggs from the fridge. She followed me, standing at the kitchen doorway, hesitating slightly. Can I use your computer? Sure. The password is your birthday, I said without turning around. I could feel her body stiffen. I didn't look back, continuing to beat the eggs. That password had been set casually when I first moved in. I didn't even know why I had used her birthday. Maybe, in some corner of my subconscious, this apartment was still tied to that 8-year-long transaction. When I brought the fried eggs and warm milk to the table, she was already sitting at the computer, browsing something. I didn't disturb her. We ate breakfast quietly. It was the first time we sat at the same table and shared a meal like ordinary roommates. The atmosphere was no longer tense or awkward like before. It had become a subtle, cautious calm. These past few years, she suddenly spoke, her eyes still fixed on the screen. You've been doing well, right? Not bad, I replied. Work's busy, but the rewards are good, she said. I saw your graduation project. It ranked first in your department. I was a little surprised she had paid attention to that. And you, I said. I heard you got an offer from the University of Pennsylvania. At the mention of this, her eyes dimmed instantly, like a star going out. She responded softly, then said nothing more, quickly finishing the rest of her milk. I knew I had touched a wound. I'll wash the dishes, she said, standing up and reaching for them. No need, I said, placing my hand over hers. Just leave them. My fingers brushed against her skin. Her hand was cold and thin. I could almost feel the outline of her bones. She reacted as if shocked, quickly pulling her hand back. George, she looked up at me seriously. I can't just stay here, eating and living for free. I need to find a job. Your body hasn't fully recovered yet, I said. I'm fine now. Her tone was firm. I checked. There are plenty of jobs that don't require high qualifications, like restaurant service or supermarket cashier. I can do those. I looked at her, at the stubborn determination written all over her face. I knew that for someone like Willow, working as a waitress would be more painful than death itself, but she would rather endure that than accept what she saw as my charity. I fell silent for a moment. All right, I said, but before that, you need to get a new ID and a bank card. I pushed the bank card with the 120,000 yuan toward her. The password is still your birthday. She looked at the card, lips pressed tightly together. Not taking it. This isn't charity, I said, meeting her eyes, speaking each word clearly. This is what you deserve. It's the return on your investment in me. Use it to start your new life. That's the final part of our transaction. Transaction. That word was the unspoken understanding between us. It gave her a reason to accept my help, and it gave me a reason to take care of her without hesitation. Finally, she reached out and picked up the card. Her fingers were still trembling slightly. Chapter 15. That weekend, I went with her to the police station to reapply for her ID card. When it came time to take the photo, she looked extremely nervous. Maybe it had been too long since she last faced a camera. She didn't even know how to put on a normal expression. Miss, please smile. Keep it natural, the photographer said impatiently. She tried to pull the corners of her lips upward, but what came out was a smile uglier than crying. I stepped forward, apologized to the photographer, then crouched down in front of her. Look at me, I said. She raised her eyes and looked at me, confused. Suddenly, I asked, do you remember the sports meet in our freshman year? She froze for a moment. You were sitting on the podium, wearing the student union uniform, with a white sun hat. I described the scene I had remembered for so long. The sun was blazing that day, and you kept chatting with the people beside you, smiling so happily. My voice was calm, as if I were telling a story that had nothing to do with her. But her eyes slowly began to change. The confusion faded, replaced by a thin layer of moisture. Softly, I said, use that smile. Can you smile like that again? She looked at me for a long time. Then she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, she faced the camera and slowly revealed a faint smile. That smile held sadness, relief, and a trace of pride, something that belonged to Willow. Even she herself hadn't noticed it. Click, the moment was captured. After finishing the ID process, we went to the bank. The process was far more complicated than I had imagined. When the bank clerk entered her name into the system, a bright red warning box immediately popped up on the screen. Dishonest debtor under enforcement. The clerk's expression instantly changed. The way she looked at us carried a hint of vigilance and disdain. I'm sorry, ma'am. Her tone turned strictly professional. According to regulations, we cannot open a new savings account for you. All bank accounts under your name have already been frozen. Willow's face turned deathly pale. She stood there like a criminal being publicly sentenced, enduring the strange, judgmental looks from the people around her. I could feel her body trembling. I stepped forward, shielding her behind me, blocking out those unfriendly gazes. Thank you, we understand. I took her hand and led her out of the bank. The sunlight outside was blinding, yet she felt no warmth at all. It's useless, George, she said, leaning against the wall, her voice filled with endless despair. I'm blacklisted. I don't even have the right to own a bank card. I won't be able to find a job. No company would hire someone who can't even open a salary account. There's no place left for me in this society. She hugged her knees and slowly crouched down, burying her face deep into her arms. The hope she had painstakingly rebuilt over the past few days was shattered in an instant by cruel reality. I looked at her despairing figure, and it felt like needles stabbing into my heart, but I knew that at this moment, any words of comfort would be pale and meaningless. I took out my phone and dialed a senior from my university. He was now a partner at a well-known law firm. Hello, senior. It's me, George. I have a legal question I'd like to consult you about. Regarding dishonest judgment debtors, what procedures are needed to get removed from the list? My voice was loud enough for Willow, crouching on the ground, to hear every word clearly. Her shoulders stopped trembling. She slowly lifted her head and looked at me in disbelief. I didn't look at her. I focused on listening to the explanation on the other end of the call, nodding from time to time and asking questions. I see, the main debt comes from joint guarantee liability after the company's bankruptcy, right? The party didn't transfer or conceal assets. Okay, I understand. So as long as we can reach a settlement agreement with the primary creditors and fulfill part of the repayment obligations, it's possible to apply to the court for removal, correct? All right, thank you, senior. I'll treat you to a meal another day. I hung up, then crouched down in front of her, meeting her eyes. "You heard everything," I said. "It's not as bad as you think. This isn't a dead end, it's just a somewhat complicated procedural issue. I'll help you find the best lawyers. We'll contact every creditor, negotiate with them, and work out a repayment plan. The money you owe, we'll pay it back together." I looked into her eyes and told her in a firm, unquestionable tone, "You're not alone." Her tears surged out once again, but this time, those tears were no longer filled with only despair. Chapter 16. Hiring lawyers, organizing debts, contacting creditors. A whole series of complicated and tedious legal procedures was officially set in motion. I mobilized all the connections and resources I had built over the years. My senior from law school recommended a team that specialized in debt disputes, professional and efficient. Willow told the lawyers everything she knew. The mess left behind by her father's company was even more complicated than I had imagined. It involved multiple banks and dozens of private creditors, with a total amount that was astronomical. But just as the lawyer said, as long as the person is still here, and as long as there is a willingness to solve the problem, there is always a way. They began trying to contact the largest creditor banks to discuss the possibility of debt restructuring and settlement. It was a long process, there was no way it could be resolved overnight, but at least, we had taken the first step. Knowing that professionals were handling this mess seemed to lift a heavy weight off Willow's heart. Her mental state visibly improved. She no longer locked herself in her room all day. When I came home from work, I would sometimes see her sitting on the couch, watching online courses on her tablet. Economics, management, design, all fields she had once been familiar with and excelled in. Like a sponge that had been dry for far too long, she was greedily absorbing knowledge, trying hard to reclaim the time she had lost. One evening, while I was working in the study, she walked in with a cup of hot milk. "Still busy?" she asked, placing the milk beside me. "Yeah, a project's at a critical stage," I replied, typing on the keyboard without looking up. She didn't leave. Instead, she stood in front of my bookshelf, examining the arrangement. Suddenly, she said, "This place is too empty." I stopped what I was doing and looked up at her. "Other than professional books, it's just a bunch of dull decorations," she said, pointing at a brass globe on my shelf. "And this, it's way too old-fashioned." Her tone carried a firm, evaluative authority. It was a tone I knew very well, the tone of Princess Willow. I couldn't help but smile. "Is that so?" I leaned back in my chair, looking at her with interest. "Then, according to your expert opinion, how should it be arranged?" "At the very least, it should have some artistic sense," she said, walking over and pointing at the blank wall behind me. "There should be a painting here, something in cool tones, a bit abstract. It would balance out all the straight lines in your room and make the space feel softer." As she spoke, she gestured in the air with her hands. Her eyes sparkled with confidence and focus, the kind of expression she only had when talking about something she truly loved. At that moment, she was no longer the fallen, broken person in need of saving. She had become that radiant Willow again, the one who pursued beauty with absolute passion. "Sounds like you really know your stuff," I said. "Of course." She lifted her chin slightly, a proud smile forming at the corner of her lips. "I minored in art history in college. My father used to collect a lot of paintings." When she mentioned her father, her smile faded a little, but the light in her eyes did not. "Then you're in charge," I said. "What?" She froze. "I'm appointing you as my home art consultant," I said seriously. "Help me redesign this place. You decide the budget." She looked at me, as if she hadn't quite processed what I just said. I picked up a pen, wrote a line on a sticky note, and slid it toward her. "This is your first advance payment." On the note, it read, "Art consultant fee, 1 bowl of shrimp rice." She stared at the words, stunned at first. Then, as if something clicked, she suddenly burst into laughter. It was the first time she had laughed out loud since coming back to this house. Clear, bright, like the sound of wind chimes. "1 bowl isn't enough," she said, lifting her head. Her eyes curved with playful mischief. "My taste back then is worth at least a semester's worth of shrimp rice." "Deal," I said with a smile. Outside the window, the city lights glittered like a river of stars. I knew that the real Willow had finally returned, and the story between us had finally turned to a brand new page, no longer about debt and repayment, but about companionship and rebirth. Chapter 17. Willow treated her role as a home art consultant like a formal contract. The very next day, she got into work mode. While I was at work, she stopped watching online courses and completely took over the high-performance computer in my study. She browsed home design websites, artists' personal pages, and online galleries like a professional curator. She even downloaded professional design software and, using nothing but a mouse and keyboard, started creating renderings for my apartment bit by bit. This was clearly a field she had never worked in before, yet she learned incredibly fast. Her sense of aesthetics was innate, something cultivated from growing up in a privileged environment. Surrounded by art and taste, she knew what beauty was, and she knew how to combine different elements to create harmony. When I came home in the evening, she would hold up her tablet like an employee reporting to her boss, presenting her research results with a serious expression. "The wall in your living room is too cold in tone," she said. "I suggest repainting it in warm gray, or using textured wallpaper. It would give the space more depth. Your sofa has very straight lines. It's too rigid. We need curves to balance it out. We can replace that square coffee table with a round one, or something with an irregular shape. And the lighting, you only have a main ceiling light. It's too monotonous. You should add a floor lamp in the corner and a table lamp beside the sofa. Use layered lighting to create atmosphere." She spoke fluently, her eyes shining with professional confidence. I rarely interrupted, just listened quietly. Looking at her, I felt as if I had returned to years ago, to those group discussions in class, where Willow could effortlessly point out the flaws in plans we had spent nights working on and offer precise, insightful improvements. Back then, all I felt toward her was awe and distance. But now, I only felt that she looked beautiful like this. I nodded. "Everything you said makes sense." After she finished, I summarized. "So, when are we going shopping?" She froze for a moment, as if she hadn't expected me to accept her plan so readily. "What about the budget?" she asked cautiously. "You decide," I said. "You're the consultant." She bit her lip, looked down, and calculated something on her tablet before showing me a number. That number wasn't even enough to buy the coat I was wearing. "Too little," I frowned. "Not at all," she immediately countered, her tone firm. "We don't need expensive luxury brands. Beauty doesn't equal price. I know a creative market that's only open on weekends. A lot of independent designers and artists sell their work there. We can go take a look. There are plenty of interesting things to discover." Her eyes sparkled with excitement. It was the first time I had seen on her face that kind of thrill, something like the joy of bargain hunting. It was completely different from how she used to be, yet somehow perfectly natural. On Saturday, I drove her to that creative market on the outskirts of the city. The market was set inside an abandoned old factory, filled with industrial vibes and artistic energy everywhere. There were young faces and all kinds of quirky stalls. Willow was like a fish back in water. She pulled me along as we weaved through the stalls, offering her own unique perspective on everything we saw. "Look at this candle holder. It's made of concrete. The design is really interesting. And it's only $30. This tapestry is hand-woven. The color combination is bold. It would look amazing on your wall. And this painting." She stopped in front of a stall selling abstract art, her eyes lighting up. "This artist's use of color has a Matisse-like quality, but the brushstrokes are freer." "Sir, how much is this one?" The vendor, a young art student, gave a very reasonable price. Willow turned to look at me. There was both a question and unmistakable desire in her eyes. I nodded. She immediately paid and carefully rolled up the modest-sized painting. We spent the entire afternoon exploring the market. She bought a lot of things: vases, candle holders, tapestries, strange little sculptures, and that painting. None of them were expensive, but together, they reflected her unique aesthetic taste. I followed behind her, carrying bags and paying, like a competent assistant. Sunlight streamed through the massive windows of the old factory, casting dappled light and shadows over her. She hugged the painting, bargaining with a vendor over $10. Her eyes curved in a bright, genuine smile. Looking at her profile, I suddenly felt that everything I had worked for over the past 8 years had led to this moment, so that after enduring the storm of fate, she could still, like now, smile from the bottom of her heart, for something purely beautiful. Chapter 18. On the way home, she hugged her pile of loot and leaned against the passenger seat, looking as satisfied as a cat that had just stolen some fish. "George," she suddenly said. "Thank you." "For what?" I asked. "For believing in my taste." I smiled, but said nothing. When we got home, she couldn't wait to begin her renovation project. She stood on a stool and hung the abstract painting on the wall of the study. The cool-toned artwork instantly neutralized the dullness of the entire space. She placed the $30 concrete candle holder on my bedside table. She spread the hand-woven tapestry across the cold wooden floor. Every corner of the house began to bear her imprint. That night, I walked into the study and stared at the painting on the wall for a long time without speaking. This place, where I had lived alone for so long, a cold, lifeless space, finally began, on this day, to feel a little like home. Progress from the legal team was faster than we had expected. After several rounds of difficult negotiations, they successfully reached a preliminary settlement agreement with the largest creditor, a state-owned bank. The bank agreed that as long as Willow could repay 20% of the principal within a specified time, they would apply to the court to temporarily remove her from the blacklist, restoring her basic civil rights, such as opening a bank account and using public transportation. This was undoubtedly a major breakthrough, but that 20% was still an astronomical figure, enough to crush any ordinary person. The lawyer placed a thick stack of documents on the coffee table in front of us, his expression serious. "Mr. Wong, MS. Liu, this is the best condition we could negotiate for now. The bank is giving us 3 months to raise the funds. If we miss the deadline, All previous efforts will be wasted. Willow looked at the settlement agreement, her face turning pale again. The small spark of hope she had just regained began to waver under the weight of reality. After the lawyer left, the apartment fell into a deathly silence. She began, her voice dry. She paused, then continued. I can sell those paintings and collectibles. My father used to hide some assets overseas, if I can find them. Not enough, I interrupted, my tone calm but firm. Even if you sell everything, it would barely make a dent. Her shoulders slumped, and the strength she had just gathered drained away in an instant. Looking at her despair, I went into the study, brought out my laptop, opened it, and placed it in front of her. On the screen was a stock trading platform and a detailed personal asset report. Stocks, funds, wealth management products, angel investments in several startups. Over the years, aside from working relentlessly, I had poured all my spare time into the capital market. Just like how I once planned that 90,000 back in college, I had meticulously and obsessively planned every cent I earned. I was no longer just a programmer who could write code. The wealth I had accumulated over the years far exceeded anything she could have imagined. Willow stared at the screen, at the endless strings of numbers and entries, too stunned to speak. These, her voice trembled. This is enough to cover the first settlement payment, and more, I said. I closed the laptop and looked into her eyes. I told you before, the money you owe, we'll repay it together. That wasn't an empty promise, but this is your money, George. She stood up abruptly, her emotions surging. I can't use your money. I've already ruined my own life. I can't drag you down with me too. This isn't a burden, Willow. I stood up and walked in front of her, meeting her gaze. This is also a deal. Have you forgotten? I invest in your company, help you deal with your debts and get through this crisis. And when your company gets back on track, I take 51% of the shares. That's fair, isn't it? She froze. Investment, company, shares. She looked at me, at my serious face, one that didn't seem like it was joking at all. Chapter 19. She suddenly understood. He was using this method again, to protect that fragile shred of her self-respect. He had always been like this, wrapping the softest, warmest kindness in the coldest, most businesslike logic. But I have nothing left, she said, her voice trembling. I don't even have a company anymore. I have nothing. You will. I looked at her, my tone firm, as if stating an undeniable fact. You can register a new company. Call it Willow Design, or whatever name you like. You'll be the founder and the sole artist. I'll be your first investor. Her tears fell again, without warning. This time, she didn't cry out loud. She just stared at me in silence. After a long while, she nodded firmly. Okay, just one word, but it carried immense weight. From that day on, the atmosphere in the apartment subtly changed. We were no longer just landlord and art consultant, we became business partners. She stopped dwelling on past failures and began working on a business plan for our new company. She researched the market, analyzed competitors, and even started reaching out to some friends she used to know in the art world. That aura of a business elite around her was slowly returning. As for me, I took care of the most difficult financial and legal matters. I sold off most of my stocks, consolidated the funds, and prepared to inject them into our shared venture. Our lives began to move in a strange but synchronized rhythm, driven by the same goal. One night, I worked overtime and came home very late. When I opened the door, I wasn't greeted by darkness, but by warm lights and the rich aroma of home-cooked food. I froze. Willow, wearing a slightly ridiculous cartoon apron, who knows where she had found it, was bringing a dish out of the kitchen. It was scrambled eggs with tomatoes, the most ordinary, home-style dish. What's this? I asked, puzzled. I noticed you've been so busy these past few days, you haven't been eating properly, she said, placing the dish on the table. She took off the apron, a little embarrassed. I just made something simple. I don't know if it suits your taste. On the table were 2 dishes and a soup. Besides the eggs with tomatoes, there was a plate of stir-fried broccoli and a bowl of pork rib soup. I looked at the dishes, then at her. Something inside me softened instantly. I sat down, picked up my chopsticks, and took a bite of the eggs with tomatoes. The taste was surprisingly good. Delicious, I said. She visibly relaxed, a faint smile appearing on her face. I learned how to cook when I was studying abroad, she said softly as she sat across from me. Back then, I missed home a lot. It was the first time she had voluntarily talked about her life overseas. I ate while quietly listening. She spoke in fragments, about how she walked into a supermarket alone for the first time in a foreign country, cooked for herself for the first time, and cried in secret when homesickness hit her. She spoke calmly, as if telling someone else's story, but I could imagine it clearly, a girl who had grown up never having to lift a finger, facing the hardships and loneliness of life all by herself. That meal was unusually quiet, yet filled with warmth. After dinner, she insisted on washing the dishes. I didn't argue. I simply leaned against the kitchen doorway, watching her as she rolled up her sleeves and busied herself at the sink. Under the light, her profile looked soft and beautiful. Suddenly, I felt that debts, business ventures, none of it really mattered anymore. I just wanted days like this to last a little longer. And then, a little longer still. Chapter 20. Life was like a precise machine. With our joint efforts, it began to run smoothly and methodically. During the day, I handled company projects and our shared debt crisis. At night, when I came home, there was always a light on and a table of hot food waiting for me. Willow, on the other hand, devoted herself entirely to her new career. She registered the company, built her personal website, and even started posting her thoughts on home aesthetics and some of her design works on art platforms. Her talent was undeniable. Soon, she attracted a small group of followers. Although she hadn't yet received any real commercial orders, she was busy and fulfilled every day. The relationship between us also settled into a very comfortable state. We were roommates sharing an apartment, partners fighting side by side in a startup. Sometimes, I would even have the illusion that we were like a married couple of many years. One weekend, the fridge at home was empty. "Let's go to the supermarket," Willow said, waving a shopping list at me. I nodded and picked up my car keys. It was the first time we went grocery shopping together like an ordinary couple. The supermarket was crowded, filled with the lively atmosphere of everyday life. Willow pushed the cart, carefully comparing products on the shelves. She would choose a different brand of yogurt to save a few cents. Then, moments later, buy a bag of pasta just because the packaging looked nice. I followed behind her, watching her switch between careful budgeting and childlike spontaneity. It made her feel so vivid, so alive. Just as we were lining up to check out, an uncertain voice came from the side. "Is that George?" I turned around and saw a fashionable woman staring at me in surprise. It took me a moment to dig her name out of my memory. Alicia, our college classmate, who used to share a dorm with Willow. "Hello," I nodded politely. Alicia's gaze moved past me and landed on Willow in front of me. The moment she recognized her, her surprise turned into outright shock, mixed with barely concealed schadenfreude. "Willow," she raised her voice, drawing attention from people around us. "Oh my God, it really is you. I thought I was mistaken. How did you end up?" She didn't finish her sentence, but the way her eyes scanned Willow up and down, full of disdain, said everything. Willow was dressed in a plain white t-shirt and jeans, her face bare of makeup. Although she looked much better than when I had first found her, compared to Alicia, who was impeccably dressed in designer brands, she still looked undeniably worn down. Willow's body stiffened, the color draining from her face. Instinctively, she tried to shrink back, to hide herself. I stepped forward and quietly positioned myself in front of her, blocking Alicia's uncomfortable gaze. "We have something to do. We'll be going now," I said coldly. I took the cart from Willow and started to leave. "Hey, don't rush off." Alicia followed after us, clearly unwilling to let it go. Her curiosity had been fully ignited. "Old classmates running into each other. We should chat a bit." "Willow, I heard from Makoto that your family. So now, are you with George?" Her tone was dripping with insinuation and malice, as if she were saying, "Look, the once high and mighty princess now has to rely on a poor guy she used to look down on." I stopped, turned around, and looked at her coldly. "Alicia," I said, each word clear and deliberate, "watch your words. Willow is my partner, and she's also my family." "Family," I said the word with firm, undeniable weight. Alicia was intimidated by my cold gaze. She opened her mouth but didn't dare say anything further. I ignored her, took Willow's hand, and walked out of the supermarket under the curious gazes of the surrounding crowd. Her hand was ice cold, and trembling uncontrollably. Chapter 21. Back in the car, she didn't say a word. She simply turned her head to look out the window, her shoulders trembling slightly. I didn't start the engine, and I didn't speak either. I knew that the awkward encounter just now had torn open the fragile defenses she had painstakingly rebuilt. It cruelly reminded her that, in the eyes of the world, she was still the fallen one, the joke who had crashed from the heights. After a long time, she finally turned back, her eyes red as she looked at me. "George," her voice was thick with tears. "About earlier, thank you, I told you," I said, looking at her. "You're my family. I won't let anyone bully you." My voice was calm, yet carried an unshakable firmness. She looked at me, and her tears fell like broken pearls. "Why are you so good to me?" she choked, asking the same question we had already gone over so many times. I looked at her tear-streaked face, and something inside me was struck hard. 8 years, ever since that truth or dare game, there had always been a thin barrier between us, something called a transaction, something called debt. I had carefully maintained it all along, because I knew it was a way to protect her, and to protect myself. But just now, in the supermarket, when I blurted out the word family, I realized that I had already torn that barrier apart with my own hands. I didn't want to hide behind cold business logic anymore. I reached out and gently wiped the tears from her face with my fingertips. Then I leaned in, slowly, drawing closer to her. Inside the narrow space of the car, a space that belonged only to the two of us, I kissed her. Her body stiffened instantly, her eyes widening in shock. Her lips were cool, tinged with the salty taste of tears, but soft. The kiss was light, gentle, devoid of desire. It was simply a long overdue declaration, 8 years in the making. I pulled back slightly, resting my forehead against hers, looking into her eyes filled with confusion. Because, I said, from the moment I received that 90,008 years ago, I held her gaze, speaking each word clearly and solemnly. You stopped being just my creditor. You were the light I looked up to for 4 whole years, and the only goal I worked toward for those same 4 years. Chapter 22, Willow, Extra. That kiss was like a stone thrown into a still lake, sending ripples across the chaotic waters of my heart, ripples that refused to settle. I could clearly feel the warmth of his lips, and that clean, reassuring woody scent that clung to him. Even after he pulled away, I remained frozen in that stiff posture, my mind completely blank. What did he just say? He said I was the light he had looked up to for 4 years. He said I was the only goal he had worked toward for 4 years. Those words were like a string of gentle explosions in my ears, blowing apart the fragile defenses I had just managed to rebuild after being torn apart by reality. But this time, what was exposed wasn't a bloody wound. It was a faint spark, buried beneath the ruins, something even I had long forgotten. My throat was dry, no sound coming out. Tears still clung to my lashes. I must have looked ridiculous and pathetic as I said, You pity me, don't you? That was the only explanation I could think of. Because he had seen my disgrace, because he had defended me in front of our classmates. So he used this method to give me some cheap comfort. Pity you. George looked at me. There was not a trace of pity in his eyes, only something deep, something I couldn't understand. Willow, have you forgotten? 8 years ago, between the two of us, who was the more pitiful one? I froze. I walked into that KTV wearing a faded old jacket, into a place where even the air smelled like money. I couldn't even afford my share of a simple split bill. In your eyes, I probably wasn't even worth being a joke. His voice was calm, as if he were telling someone else's story. Did you ever pity me back then? He asked. I instinctively shook my head. No, I had to admit, back then, I stood too high above everything. Ignorant of hardship, I looked at George as if he were a creature from a completely different world. There was curiosity, confusion, but never pity or sympathy. That kind of emotion simply didn't exist between us. You didn't, George said. You just, in your own unconscious and clumsy way, gave me a chance. With 90,000, you built me a bridge, one that let me crawl out of that dark swamp I was stuck in and see what lay on the other side. From that day on, you stood at the other end of that bridge. I ran across it every day with everything I had. I didn't dare stop. Every time I looked up, I could see you. You were my direction. I never thought I would actually reach your side. I just wanted that when I finally reached the end, I'd at least have the right to stand in front of you, look you in the eye, and return what I owed you with dignity. I spent 8 years, and finally made it to the end. He reached out and gently wiped the tears from my face again, his gaze burning with sincerity. But then I realized, you weren't there anymore. You had fallen into a swamp even deeper than the one I was in back then. So this time, his voice softened to something incredibly gentle. Let me be the one to build you a bridge. My tears broke completely. So that's how it was. That game I had long forgotten. That money I had never thought twice about, it had carved such a deep mark in his heart. That careless stone I had thrown into the water had truly changed the course of someone's life. And now, that same river had flowed back, trying to save the dried-up version of me. I couldn't say a single word. I could only let him become a beam of light named George, shining into my chaotic world. I don't remember how we got home. I only remember that when he started the car, he naturally took my hand, resting cold on my lap, into his. His hand was large, warm, and steady, filled with strength. He didn't say a word the entire way. He just held my hand firmly, in a way that left no room for doubt. When we got back to the apartment, he put the groceries into the fridge, then, as usual, went into the kitchen and started preparing dinner. I stood in the living room, watching his back as he moved around the kitchen, tall, steady, reassuring. That quiet, poor student I had once left far behind without a second thought, had, without me noticing, grown into a towering tree, one that could shield me from wind and rain. He came out carrying 2 bowls of steaming noodles and placed them on the table. Eat. I sat down, picked up my chopsticks, but didn't move. George, I looked at him, gathering the greatest courage I had in my life, and asked the most important question. Then what are we now? He looked up at me, at my face filled with tension and unease, and suddenly smiled. That smile was like winter sunlight, instantly melting the last bit of ice in my heart. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached out, and with his fingertips, gently brushed a loose strand of hair from my face and tucked it behind my ear. The gesture was soft, intimate, and full of unspoken meaning. In that moment, I understood everything. Chapter 23. The next day was Monday. George left early for work as usual, but I knew something had already changed. For the first time, after he left the house, I felt a strange emptiness. I walked to the door of his bedroom. It wasn't closed. Inside was exactly his style, minimalist, cold. Everything arranged with perfect order, just like his personality, precise and restrained. On the bed lay the pajamas he had just taken off, still carrying the warmth and scent he had left behind. As if possessed, I walked in, picked up the pajamas, held them in my arms, buried my face in them, and took a deep breath. It was all his scent. The realization made my face burn instantly, like a thief caught in the act. I hurriedly put the clothes back and fled his room, but inside, it felt like a deer was running wild in my chest. So, this is what it feels like to like someone. Sweet, flustered, and completely overwhelming. The entire morning, I was trapped in this chaotic emotion, unable to focus on anything, until a call from the lawyer pulled me back to reality. MS. Lou, the bank has confirmed the settlement agreement. We need you to provide some documentation regarding your father's company's earlier assets, especially overseas assets. This will be crucial for our next round of negotiations. Do you remember where these materials might be kept? I tried to recall. My father, he had a very hidden safe. It's not in the company, and not at home. It's in our old house in the suburbs. That house was where I had grown up. Later, when we moved to a luxury apartment in the city center, it had been left vacant, with only a housekeeper returning occasionally to clean it. After everything happened, it, like all our properties, had been sealed by the court. Understood, the lawyer said. I'll immediately apply to the court for temporary access on the grounds of searching for key evidence. You may need to be present to identify the items. After hanging up, my heart sank. Going back there, I would have to return to that place that carried all my beautiful childhood memories, now reduced to ruins. I was afraid. I told George about it. There was a brief silence on the other end of the phone. Then he said, I'll take leave. I'll go with you. You don't have to, you're busy with work. I said, I'll go with you. His tone left no room for argument. 2 days later, we stood with the lawyer in front of that familiar iron gate. The seal had been removed. 2 court officers stood nearby, expressionless, supervising. I looked at the familiar wrought iron gate, at the garden where the flowers and grass had grown wild without care. My eyes instantly reddened. I remembered. That swing had been built by my father for my 5th birthday. That lawn was where my 18th birthday party had been held. Every inch of this place was etched with my memories, and with the glory my family once had. Now, everything was gone. My legs felt like they were filled with lead. I couldn't take a single step forward. A warm hand took mine. It was George. He said nothing, just squeezed my hand firmly, then pulled me along, step by step, into that place that was both familiar and utterly strange. Inside, a thin layer of dust had settled everywhere. All the furniture was covered in white sheets, like silent ghosts. The air was filled with a stale, decaying smell. Relying on memory, I led them upstairs, to a room at the very back of my father's study. It was a private collection room. The walls, once filled with famous paintings, now only bore empty outlines where they had once hung. I walked to one wall and, following the sequence I remembered, entered a code on a set of mechanisms disguised as books. The wall slowly slid open, revealing a massive built-in safe. The lawyer and the court officers both showed visible surprise. I turned the dial and opened the heavy door. Inside, there were no gold bars or jewels like I had imagined, only neatly arranged files and several velvet boxes. I opened one of the boxes. Inside lay a sapphire necklace, my mother's favorite piece of jewelry. In another box was a men's wristwatch, the first gift I had ever given my father. It turned out that, to him, the most valuable things had never been those priceless collections, but these items that carried the emotions of his family. My tears fell uncontrollably, drop by drop, onto the velvet boxes. George walked over and gently wrapped his arms around me from behind. He didn't say anything. He just rested his chin lightly on the top of my head, using his warmth to comfort me in silence. At that moment, in this cold room filled with painful memories, I felt, for the first time, a sense of peace I had never known before. I knew I was no longer facing all of this alone. My past might have been shattered beyond repair, but my future, because of him, was slowly being pieced back together. Chapter 24. We found crucial documents in the safe at the old house. Inside, there were not only equity certificates of my father's overseas companies, but also several highly concealed trust agreements he had signed years ago. When the legal team saw these documents, their eyes lit up. MS. Lou, this is a major breakthrough, the lawyer said excitedly. With these, we have much stronger leverage in negotiations with the bank. This proves your father did not maliciously transfer assets, but had already established legal asset isolation for the family before the company collapsed. Legally, this gives us a huge advantage. This was undoubtedly the first ray of light at the end of the tunnel. Although we were still far from resolving everything, at least, we could finally see hope. When we left the old house, I turned back to look at the building, now standing in the setting sun, desolate and quiet. The sadness in my heart seemed to have eased a little. Perhaps the best way to say goodbye to the past is not to forget it, but to take what matters most from it, and move forward. And now, by my side, I already had someone to walk forward with me. On the way back, I leaned against George's shoulder, silent. He didn't speak either. He simply changed the music in the car to Castle in the Sky, my favorite. The gentle melody felt like a soft hand, smoothing out all the creases in my heart. From that day on, life seemed to press the fast-forward button. The legal team used the newly discovered evidence to begin another round of negotiations with the bank, and I finally got my first opportunity in my new career. A week later, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. The caller introduced himself as a manager from a boutique hotel. He said he had seen my articles and design concepts on spatial aesthetics online, admired my ideas, and wanted to invite me to design the soft furnishings for a new VIP lounge in their hotel. After hanging up, I jumped up on the spot in excitement. My first real client. I rushed into the study and threw my arms around George, who was reading documents. I got a project. George, I got a project. He staggered slightly from the impact, then quickly reacted, a genuine smile spreading across his face. Holding my shoulders, he looked at my flushed face, shining with excitement. His eyes were filled with admiration and pride. I knew you could do it, he said. At that moment, his affirmation meant more to me than any business success ever could. I poured all my passion into the project. I stayed up for several nights, went through massive amounts of research, and created dozens of design drafts. George didn't interfere with any of my decisions, but when I stayed up late, he would quietly bring me a cup of hot milk. When I got stuck and frustrated, he would take me out for a walk, telling me interesting stories from his work to distract me. He was like the best support system, always there, giving me the strongest backing whenever I needed it. Half a month later, I brought a thick, near-perfect proposal to meet the hotel manager. He was extremely satisfied with my design and signed the contract on the spot. The advance payment was soon transferred into the corporate account of Willow Design. When I received the bank notification and saw that first income in the account, my eyes almost filled with tears. Compared to my family's debt, that money was just a drop in the ocean. But to me, it meant everything. It proved that I, Willow, was not someone who could only rely on others. With my own hands, with my own talent, I could stand up again. I grabbed my phone, rushed out of the apartment, and ran all the way to the building where George worked. I called him. Come downstairs, now, immediately. A few minutes later, he hurried out of the building. What's wrong? Did something happen? He asked. I didn't answer. I stood on tiptoe and, under the gaze of the passing crowd, planted a loud kiss on his lips. Then I held up my phone in front of him like a child showing off a report card. George, look, I made money. He looked at the number on the screen, then at my radiant face. He froze for a moment, then burst into laughter. That laughter was full of joy and affection. All right, he said, smiling as he ruffled my hair. So, my consultant Lou, what do you want to eat tonight? My treat. No need for you to treat. I lifted my chin proudly. Tonight, I'm treating. Let's go home. I'll make you a deluxe shrimp rice, worth $25. He smiled, took my hand, and said, all right, let's go home. Under the setting sun, our shadows stretched long. I knew, the brand new, hope-filled future that belonged to us had finally arrived.